So, welcome to Unseen Victims, addressing human trafficking in elderly and the disabled populations. Mary Kate Waggoner is a master's social work, licensed independent social worker with supervision, and she's an anti-human trafficking victim advocate with Human Trafficking Initiative of Ohio, of the Office of Ohio Attorney General. Mary Kate is committed to creating meaningful change by empowering communities and advancing the rights and well-being of all people. With a background in social work, she specializes in providing trauma-informed care to survivors of sexual violence with a focus on supporting victims of human trafficking. Mary Kate's passions lie in anti-human trafficking advocacy and systematic reform. She currently serves as the anti-human trafficking victim advocate for the Ohio Attorney General's office, where she leads initiatives to enhance victim services for survivors of human trafficking. She also provides essential training and technical assistance to anti-trafficking organizations, professionals, and community members across the state of Ohio. Welcome, Mary Kate.
Thank you. Sure.
Sorry.
That one's off.
You got it. Yep, you good. You're good.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thanks to everyone who could come in person and online today. I am always excited for the opportunity to talk about this subject, which I'm very passionate about, which is anti-human trafficking, but specifically related to how anti-trafficking intersects with the elderly and disabled populations that you all serve at Direction Home. So as Teresa mentioned, I serve as the anti-human trafficking victim advocate with our Ohio Attorney General, Dave Yost. Thank you. And so a lot of my role falls under helping agencies that are serving vulnerable populations understand what human trafficking is, how it might intersect with the populations that you serve, and ultimately how to serve those populations in a way that is trauma-informed, understanding what resources exist for them to recover from their human trafficking. A little bit about our unit. We have multiple goals, but they kind of fall into these 4 categories. Building awareness is one. So as you might have guessed, I do a lot of training, such as the one that we're doing today. We want each Ohioan to take action in their own communities to combat human trafficking. We all have our own spheres of influence, whether that be in our workplace or just in the world that we exist in. So if we all do what we can to combat human trafficking, we will live in a world where trafficking no longer exists. And that's what we want to see happen. Strengthening victim services is where I spend a lot of my role because I'm a social worker and I have a background in victim advocacy. So I want to help folks do the best that they can do to serve survivors of trafficking. And traffickers and sex buyers being brought to justice is another piece of the equation. A lot of that is my supervisor's responsibility. She has a background in prosecution, and so she spends a lot of time training law enforcement and attorneys that may be working human trafficking investigations and prosecutions. So that's just a little context of where I'm coming to you from today. We have a hefty list of learning objectives today within our hour, but I'm confident that we can get through them and that you'll walk away feeling that you better understand the issue of trafficking and ultimately how to respond to it if you were to encounter human trafficking in your line of work or as a member of the community. There's a lot of information out there about human trafficking, some of which is not so true information. There's a lot of myths out there on social media and movies and TV shows. So I've put some different examples of what these myths might look like on the slides. We have Liam Neeson, who is known for being in the Taken movies. Some of you may have seen those. They're entertaining movies, but they're not, unfortunately, a great depiction of what human trafficking actually looks like. It's very Hollywood-esque, very glamorized, and it's not very accurate to what we see on the ground. I also personally have seen lots of social media posts similar to this one. It's probably a little bit hard to read on the screen, but essentially this person is commenting that they went to a store, they came out and they had an X on their windshield, and so they're concerned that they're being targeted for human trafficking. I've seen similar posts talking about zip ties and things like that. They're fairly common. The truth is that these cases are not usually associated at all with human trafficking. And we'll talk about why here in a moment. So some of the, probably the number one myth that I still hear is this idea that human trafficking and kidnapping are the same thing. Somewhere along the way, I think we started to use those as interchangeable terms, and that's actually not the reality. So victims are most likely to be trafficked by somebody that they know, that they have a relationship with in some way, because there's a grooming process involved in trafficking. So more often than a stranger or somebody, grabbing someone from a location, it's going to be a family member, a friend, a significant other, somebody that has taken time to build that relationship with the victim and exploit that relationship. There's a lot of information out there that might indicate that it's a over there problem. Like it's only happening in other parts of the world, or it's not happening in my community. It's only happening in, big cities. And that's unfortunately not true. Human trafficking happens in all different communities, whether that's rural, suburban, urban. It happens domestically and internationally. The only three things that human trafficking needs to exist are vulnerable people, people that are willing to exploit those vulnerable people, and the demand for those vulnerable people. And those three elements can exist in any zip code or anywhere around the world. So movies like Taken, where the individual is taken across the world, that's not always necessarily the case. There's a lot of people that are being trafficked in their own homes, in their own schools, that are going to work every day and still being exploited. Another myth is that human trafficking always involves chains or physical restraints. So if you were to Google today, human trafficking and look at the images, you'll see a lot of imagery depicting people that are, physically restrained somewhere or have duct tape over their mouth, lots of kidnapping type imagery. And that's a myth because many victims, more often than that physical force, they're experiencing mental and psychological force and manipulation and blackmail and brainwashing that's keeping them in that situation. So they may, be victims of physical force at some point during their trafficking experience, but to be looking for somebody that is being tied up or restrained somewhere, you might miss victims that are walking around looking like a normal person that's not being victimized to the untrained eye. It can happen to people of any gender, and this applies not just to victims, but also traffickers as well. I think we all maybe have a stereotype that victims tend to be young females and traffickers tend to be older, scary-looking males, right? Those are typically the stereotypes that we think about. But traffickers can be anybody and victims can be anybody. It falls all across the spectrum, and it can also be any age, socioeconomic status, race, all of those demographics. We see victims and traffickers in all of those categories. So what is the reality of human trafficking? Traffickers view this as a business. They view it from a very economic lens. It's a very lucrative business. And so they are making, as an industry, multiple billions of dollars each year. It's the second fastest growing criminal industry in the world. And traffickers ultimately, let me go back. they ultimately treat the people that they're victimizing as if they were goods. And when we think about the basic principles of economics, when there's a high demand for something, the supply also has to increase to meet that demand. So traffickers are the ones providing the supply. We have a high demand for commercial sex in our world. We also have a high demand for cheap goods and services. We like things to be cheap. And that is the demand that drives traffickers to victimize people. So they don't treat victims as people with souls, but they treat them like goods, and they treat them in ways that is very inhumane. At its most basic terms, trafficking is forcing another person to either engage in sex for money or to work for little or no money. And we'll break down that definition further here in a moment. And once again, the force that a trafficker uses isn't always just physical. There's a lot of mental and emotional force and manipulation and grooming that occurs in the trafficking. So human trafficking itself is an umbrella term, and under that umbrella, broadly speaking, is sex trafficking and labor trafficking. Now, you may see some similarities amongst these definitions here. When we look at the human trafficking piece, you might notice 3 words within the definition, and that is force, fraud, or coercion. At least one of those elements has to exist in order for something to be considered human trafficking. So the methods between sex and labor trafficking are the same. There's always going to be force, fraud, or coercion. The venue that the person's being trafficked into differs. So with sex trafficking, this is where it's happening in the context of the commercial sex industry. This isn't just a sex act, that there's something of value being exchanged here. And most often we think about money, but it could also be things like drugs, housing, really anything of value. Even something to consider with individuals with disabilities is something called micro exchanges. There's been different studies out there that show the different types of transactions that occur, and there's a term called micro exchanges. It could be something as de minimis as a McDonald's Happy Meal that's exchanged, and that could be considered commercial sex. So again, force, fraud, or coercion into performing a commercial sex act, that's sex trafficking. When there's force, fraud, or coercion, where individuals are forced to perform labor or services, that's where we see labor trafficking. And this can include situations of debt bondage, where an individual has incurred either a real or a fictional debt to their trafficker that they can never get out from under, forced labor, or even involuntary child labor. So going beyond just breaking those labor laws or labor exploitation, but into trafficking where there's force, fraud, or coercion. I want to give 2 different disclaimers to this definition. One of which is a person with a developmental disability cannot consent to commercial sex in Ohio. So anyone with a developmental disability that meets this definition here in the Ohio Revised Code that's engaged in a commercial sex act is considered a victim of human trafficking under the law. So if you're ever working with someone that has a developmental disability and has disclosed that they've exchanged sex or a sex act for something of value, they are considered a victim of trafficking under the law. So this is where it actually highlights that. If the other person is less than 18 or is a person with developmental disability whom the offender knows or has reasonable cause to believe is a person of developmental disability, that is automatically considered sex trafficking. So that individual would not have to go to a court of law and say, and prove that they didn't consent, because the law recognizes that they didn't consent in the first place. The other disclaimer is anyone under the age of 18 engaged in commercial sex, the law also protects them and recognizes that there's no consent to commercial sex when there's a minor involved. And so they don't have to go once again, in a court of law and prove that to a jury. Before I go into this, I should have said this at the beginning, but since it's a smaller group today, if there are questions or comments throughout, please feel free to jump in. I'm happy to take them at the end as well, but I know we're covering a lot of content, so feel free. So let's break down sex trafficking a little bit further. This is by no means a comprehensive list or a checklist of any kind, but these are some of the red flags that you may see come up if you're encountering a victim of human trafficking. The reason we talk about signs is most victims do not have the terminology to label what's happening to them as human trafficking. They are exposed to the same resources and media that we are. And so they may see taken and think that's what human trafficking is, and that's not my story, and so I'm not trafficked. Most of the time, a victim of trafficking is going to present with some other signs and symptoms, or they may label it as something like a sexual assault or domestic violence, or their abuser or their employer has been abusing them. They may use terms like that versus the label of human trafficking. With sex trafficking, there may be limited access or control of identification documents or money. And that goes for labor trafficking as well. If you don't have access to those things in our world, you're really limited as to what you can do. There's not a lot of independence. And that's what traffickers want to do. They want to strip away as much independence as they possibly can from someone. Maybe they have an inconsistent story, or it seems kind of canned or well rehearsed. Traffickers often groom their victims to have a particular narrative when they encounter a helping professional. They tell them to lie about certain things that are happening to them or about the relationship. And so that could certainly explain why that's going on. If there's an older, controlling figure that's trying to limit their ability to communicate for themselves, that's a red flag. So of course we consider that some people do require an additional person to be able to communicate openly. But as much as we possibly can, we want to make sure that that individual has a voice and that they're not being limited, no one's answering questions for them that they could be answering for themselves. They may have multiple hotel key cards, prepaid credit cards, or cell phones. Those things are more difficult to trace if there was ever a law enforcement investigation launched. And hotel key cards might be in their possession because it's a common venue where sex trafficking is occurring. Unable to come and go as they please. Again, that might not look like that physical restraint, but there may be an excessive checking in with that individual, tracking them on their phone, limiting who they can speak to and when. And signs of physical, mental, or emotional abuse. This may seem rather innocuous, but I put that there because, again, a lot of victims are presenting with other symptoms and they're not saying, I'm a victim of trafficking, because they often don't have that language. Unfortunately, I do have to highlight familial sex trafficking, which is where the trafficking is actually happening in the context of a family. And this is a really difficult topic for a lot of folks, and that's why I say unfortunately we have to talk about it, because it is the reality of what we see. It's the most commonly reported type of sex trafficking. We see a lot of connection to substance abuse in familial trafficking. That can be the motivator behind why somebody might choose to exploit a family member. It's often normalized in the family context and kind of treated as a family business, which can add another layer of difficulty for victims to self-identify and come forward as victims. It's often framed as this is just what we do to provide for the family, and certainly family members will use and abuse authority and loyalty to the family unit to keep someone from coming forward. Just like so many of us are online all the time, traffickers are as well. And they are looking for victims and to engage in the grooming process online from the comfort of their own homes. So this is a dynamic that we've really seen shift within the anti-trafficking space. Before, there was a lot of street level trafficking. Traffickers were out in communities and meeting with people and engaging in that grooming process in real life. Certainly that still happens, but we're seeing it online now as well. And this is why when we do prevention education, one thing we talk about is the importance of internet safety and the importance of understanding, who might be behind the screen and what their intentions might be and how to keep yourself and your loved ones safe online. It can be something as simple as, sliding into someone's DMs, their direct messages, or liking and commenting on photos, trying to make them feel special, trying to connect on something that they might have in common with them. Even this idea of, a sugar daddy can be kind of a piece of the grooming process to get somebody into a trafficking scenario. And with online grooming, we have to consider the pre-existing risks that we know of with at-risk adults. So many at-risk adults become victims of online romance scams, financial scams, sextortion, or other forms of online grooming and even human trafficking. So when I show this example, this is a profile that, it's a fake profile, but it can be something like this might be linked to a financial scam. But there's profiles like this that could also be linked to human trafficking as well. And so we have victims now that have been trafficked, have never met their trafficker in person, don't know who they really are. All of the money has been exchanged online, and this person is now blackmailing them with maybe sexually explicit photos or videos that they groomed them into sending. So these are some of the dynamics that we see play out. I see some stuff in the chat. Is there questions?
We do have some questions.
Okay, we can go ahead and take those.
All right, let's see if this works. Check, 1, 2, 3. Oh, it's a little echoey. Okay, so we have one question that says, don't the hotels recognize more than one key card held by the same person, or the same people frequently visiting the hotel?
Not necessarily. Unfortunately, some hotel systems, I guess I should say every hotel system has a different set of policies and procedures, has a different, limit to how many times somebody could get a card or check into a hotel. Unfortunately, the reality is we do see a lot of hotels and motels even kind of being complicit or turning a blind eye because it's generating profit for them. So there is a lot of great work being done to really educate hotel systems and try to prevent that kind of thing from happening. And so I do want to acknowledge that, but that's the truth, that those things don't necessarily raise red flags all the time for hotels. And if they do, they may choose to ignore that.
And then a somewhat related question. If a person is in a shelter and I need to take that off. If a person is in a shelter and the shelter staff sees red flags that a person is being trafficked, especially if a minor, is there any way legally that they can be separated from their abuser?
Legally that they can be separated, like, I guess I would need more info in what context specifically. There's lots of avenues. I'm a social worker, I'm not an attorney, so I can't give legal advice or anything, but my understanding is with a minor specifically, that there's a lot more options on the table because we know the law says specifically anyone under 18. I will say outside of legally, something I've seen done a lot of times is if there is a victim and their trafficker is present, being able to kind of separate or blame it on like, oh, this is our policy that we have to interview separately. That's something I've done a million times, even if it's not really the policy. You can kind of blame it on like, oh, we just have to do this. So if there's any pushback, you can kind of you know, make the agency the bad guy of like, oh, well, I have to do this, it's out of my hands type of thing, and not raise any suspicion for the victim. So if there's any more like specific questions or context, I can try to get into that more, but that's kind of the overall view of options. Awesome. Thanks for reading those. All right, so looking at the other side of the coin, labor trafficking. This is a list of the most commonly reported venues in which labor trafficking occurs. And this is according to information from the National Human Trafficking Hotline. So this is a national landscape of industries that we see. Agriculture is number one on the list. And as we all know, living in Ohio, there's quite a lot of agriculture and quite a lot of need for workers to support the agriculture industry. And so this is something that not only is a high need, but it's also something that's often kind of physically remote. And workers on these farms can kind of fly under the radar a lot of the time. A really interesting documentary that y'all may want to check out after today if you want some extra information. There's a Frontline PBS documentary called Trafficked in America, and it actually is about an egg farm in Marion, Ohio, where Guatemalan teenagers were being labor trafficked and all kinds of issues arose, but they actually were placed on the egg farm with who they thought were sponsors by the US government. And so it's a really, really sad story, but it's a fascinating documentary to really understand the dynamics that we see in labor trafficking. Domestic work, this is where we see nannies, caregivers, babysitters, any work that's occurring within the home. And so for those in the room that are even working with caregivers, this is something to consider, that domestic work is an industry that is often exploited, and there could be some red flags there as well for potential trafficking. So some general signs, again, that monitoring or excessive control from another person trying to limit their communication. In cases of labor trafficking, it's common for folks to be threatened by their employer by deportation or another kind of harm. This is specific to labor trafficking in a number of ways, because 90% of labor trafficking survivors are foreign nationals. And so deportation is a very real threat that traffickers use against them. Even if they do have documentation, traffickers will often try to twist that and use that against them. And then you add the layer of potential language barriers, cultural barriers, not understanding where to go for help, or being separated from your community if you are a foreign national. We also see working in often dangerous environments without the proper training or gear, or without adequate breaks or other protections. And often the employers are providing the living space for the folks they're trafficking as well. Often these conditions are really inhumane. Maybe there's dozens of people living in a very small space, or there's no air conditioning or heat or running water, just the basic things that we need as humans to survive and be comfortable. So some of you might be familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs. This is something that we learn in social work school fairly early on. But essentially, this pyramid is supposed to highlight these different core areas that we all need as human beings. And the bottom of the pyramid is really those foundational needs, and we build off of that as those foundational needs are met. So from the trafficker's lens, they're looking for different areas of need in all of these categories. So if someone doesn't have their basic physiological needs met, the trafficker is going to try and provide a place for them to stay, or food, or clothing. Safety and security, maybe the trafficker is offering to remove them from another abusive situation and posing as that hero or that family figure that person maybe doesn't have, promising safety and security. Maybe it's love and belonging. There's a lot of relationships or a lot of victims where their trafficker is someone that they're in a relationship with, whether it's their boyfriend, girlfriend, partner, husband, wife, you name it. And they'll exploit that love and that desire to be cared for, that human need that we all have to be loved. Self-esteem, maybe they're buying them nice clothes or giving them lots of compliments, or self-actualization, maybe they have this amazing dream that they want to, like, I don't know, make it in the music industry or something, and they promise to fulfill that dream for them. Another example of how this could play out is the power and control wheel. This is something that was developed by the National Human Trafficking Hotline. It's a modified version of the domestic violence power and control wheel, but this is specific to human trafficking. So as you can see, the outer part of the wheel has sex trafficking and labor trafficking with some common venues where that might occur. The inside spokes of the wheel are the different dynamics that a trafficker may use, and the power and control is in the center, because that's what it's all about for traffickers. They want power and control, and money certainly is a great way to get power and control. And once again, they're making a lot of money doing this. So the effects of trauma on victims is really vast, but in human trafficking situations, victims are experiencing a cycle of good and bad treatment that creates what's called a trauma bond or trauma coerced attachment, where they have mixed feelings of care for this person, but they're also terrified of this person. And it can create this ongoing cycle of trying to leave and coming back, or leaving but missing that person. These really complex dynamics. And it can create a lot of shame for that individual. Many of us have probably heard of fight, flight, or freeze as a trauma response. We also know with newer research, there's also fawn and flock as potential trauma responses as well. Fawn is a people-pleasing response. Like if you're in the presence of danger, you might go into, well, I'm just going to do whatever you want me to do to try and help me not be in danger anymore. And flock would mean going and seeking out community, even if it's with people that you know are not good for you, because you just want to be with other people. Our brains decide in a split second which trauma response is going to be deployed to keep us safe. So victims may fall into any of these categories. You could work with a victim that is completely shut down and just flat affect. There's no indicator that they're upset or anything like that to the naked eye. You might also work with someone that is in fight and they're extremely agitated and angry and all of those things. So victims can fall anywhere on the spectrum, and it can change moment to moment as well. There's a number of ways that trauma can show up in the body. So I want to frame this as, instead of a victim maybe being resistant to help or quote unquote non-cooperative, the trauma bond is a way that victims survive what has happened to them. It's our brain's way of trying to survive a really traumatic scenario. These are some of the reasons why a survivor may initially choose to stay when they have an opportunity to leave, or they might leave and then come back, and they're struggling to break that bond. Maybe their basic needs are being met by the trafficker. Maybe they are in debt. Maybe they have a substance abuse disorder and the trafficker's providing them with drugs. Unfamiliar with surroundings, whether that's location or country. Maybe them or their families are being threatened. So I have these listed for a number of reasons, but one thing I really want to emphasize is just compassion for what it might be like to be in that person's shoes and to feel like your options are so limited. Bessel van der Kolk has this great quote that I think explains trauma bonding well. And it says, people in general seek increased attachment in the face of danger. When there's no access to ordinary sources of comfort, people may turn towards their tormentor for survival. And that's what we see with a lot of victims. So how does this apply to the folks that you serve at Direction Home? So there's some vulnerabilities that exist within older adults and individuals with disabilities. Of course, every scenario is going to be different, but these are some vulnerabilities that may exist in those populations. That could look like a lack of independence, having to rely on somebody else for everything, cognitive impairment or decline, those systemic problems of ageism or ableism or discrimination, infantilization. Maybe there's an increased risk of injury, or stigma and shame around reporting. We had a conversation earlier before we started the presentation about how it's really difficult for victims to come forward in general and just say this is what happened to them. There's a lot of shame. But then when you add another layer of being an older adult that maybe never grew up feeling free to talk about these kind of things, it can be really, really difficult for somebody to come forward and say what's happened to them. So some dynamics that we might see in the human trafficking of older adults, something that we call benefits trafficking. In Ohio, we don't have a criminal statute specific to benefits trafficking. I would love to see that change, and more info to come on that, but other states do recognize benefits trafficking as a very specific crime. So this is where the trafficker will actually withhold food stamps, Medicaid, Social Security, etc., in exchange for commercial sex, drugs, money, or housing. And so this is how they victimize people. We'll talk about benefits trafficking, and I'll give a case example here momentarily. Financial control or abuse, abusing the power of attorney or guardianship. Remember, we talked about familial trafficking. This is a way that familial trafficking can actually play out. Forced work or sexual activity in exchange for something of value. So are they abusing finances or power of attorney or guardianship? Are they using that as a threat to get somebody to engage in commercial sex or forced labor? Or exploitation by a caregiver themselves. Somebody that requires a caregiver has learned obedience to that caregiver, and so that relationship could be exploited. We talked about benefits trafficking. The next slide, I'm actually going to play a short video example of how benefits trafficking played out for some older adults in the state of Georgia.
The first time I spotted Mr. Hill, he was walking down Clifton Springs Road. It was just weird to have someone walking down the street with a sweater on, some shorts, carrying a big blanket. So I decided to turn around and have a little chat with him. Hey, you okay? Initially, he told me that he was being held hostage in a basement. A basement? I'm not gonna lie, I thought he probably was a little crazy, but something was going on and I was like, okay, well, let me see if there's some truth to this. He was able to tell me his name, his date of birth, the last address on his license, so he was coherent enough. And he actually said to me, he said, I know I sound crazy, but I'm telling you the truth. I patted him down before I put him in my car. Well, he actually handed me some bent up nails. So he explained to me that she actually took the nails and bent them to lock him inside of the room, and the nails held the door together. At that point, I put him into the unit, and then we proceeded to drive around so we could try to find the house. I proceeded to ask him, do you know what your house looks like? He tells me no, he's only seen the house once, and that was when
I'm sorry.
And she bought him initially to the residence.
Mr. Hill had been in the basement, and he could hear what was going on above him, in the house above him. There was a family up there, there was a dog, and he recognized the bark of the dog.
That could be it right there.
Right here. At that point, the dog is barking. He says, this is the house, this is the house. He's pointing at the house. I get out as I make my way towards the residence. I come in contact with Mr. Wheeler. Mr. Wheeler was dirty. He had a lot of, crust and stuff on his face like that. He was walking very slow. It looked like he was malnourished.
And she asked him who lives in this house.
Do you live with someone in the basement?
And that's when he told her that there was another guy, but he had busted out that morning. And she realized, wow, that maybe this is true.
Is this Mr. Hill? He came over, identified Mr. Hill for me, At that point, I asked him to show me where he was, staying in the basement. He proceeded to walk me around the side of the house, and we came to a door at the back of the residence. When I saw what I had, I called for some units to help me secure the location because it was a pretty big house. I called detectives, crime scene out so we could get a search warrant, make sure everything was processed legally. So the chain of custody was there.
It was so wonderful that she thought to get a search warrant, to bring a detective to the scene, to bring crime scene out to the scene, to take the photographs and to do everything properly. And that means it was all recorded and I was able to use it as evidence.
While we were out here investigating, Miss Faust actually pulled up into the driveway. She was in an Escalade, her daughter was in the passenger seat. At that point, I did transport her down to CID headquarters.
This is Detective Russell. I'm out at Clifton Springs Manor. I'm out with Johnny Ray Hill. What's the living conditions like where you were staying?
The door is locked all the time until she comes in to feed her.
Okay.
Which is twice a day.
All right, what about sleeping? What do you sleep on?
One single bed. You should see his damn bed here. That looks like a damn trampoline for a kid.
What about shower?
It's a aluminum bowl under the table there in the room.
She fill that up every day?
No, about every 2 weeks.
What about restroom?
It's a paint bucket, discarded paint bucket. That's what you do 1 and 2 in. Peeing and shitting.
Okay.
And that's it.
Anytime elderly or disabled people are exploited, it's always about money. The detective was looking not just to see what was happening in the basement, which is where the two men were living, but they also searched the upstairs. He found a bank statement that had Johnny Hill's name on it and also had Chandra Faust's name on it. And she had actually added her name to his bank account and that's how she was able to spend all of his checks. And we have actually had photographs of Chandra Faust accessing his funds.
Now, did you ever talk with her about putting her name on either one of your bank accounts?
Absolutely not.
Did you ever let anyone else have permission to take money out of your account to a debit card?
Absolutely not.
Or did you give anyone permission to write checks on your account and take your money out?
Absolutely not.
The grand jury indicted Ms. Faust on false imprisonment, exploitation of a disabled adult, 2 counts of abuse of a disabled adult, and also 2 counts of theft by taking. She was sentenced to 20 to serve 10, and that means 10 years in custody, followed by 10 additional years on probation.
It felt real good to see Ms. Faust go to jail for what she did. To take someone's freedom from them unwillingly, to me, is very bad, but crimes against elderly people who can't help themselves. She was praying for her own financial gains.
I think the most important thing that Yolanda did was give him some credence. She listened and she investigated what he had to say, even though it sounded a little bit crazy.
I think Officer Shields is an excellent example of what a police officer can do and what a difference they can make, going with that gut feeling that something doesn't feel right.
I'm gonna stop the video there.
And
So there's a lot of different dynamics that played out in that case example. That individual was posing as a care home for these individuals, and that's why she was able to have access to them. She clearly was abusing the power of attorney or guardianship or whatever financial control she had over them in order to satisfy her own gain. And that's an example of how benefits trafficking could play out. She was not criminally charged with benefits trafficking in that scenario, but there's a lot of dynamics that happened in that case example that could be considered a form of benefits trafficking. So some additional dynamics that we may see in the human trafficking of individuals with disabilities, we have to consider the different barriers around reporting abuse. Maybe there's a generalized lack of awareness on sex or unhealthy relationships or exploitation. So we do a lot of prevention education around that. Isolation and loneliness, traffickers use that to their advantage. withholding medications. When you read more in depth about that particular case study that we just watched, she was withholding medications from these individuals as well, to try and perpetuate this idea of them being crazy and being really doing a lot of victim blaming. Or if maybe they previously were engaged in certain friend groups or community groups, and there's suddenly, there's a change in attendance or a change in friend groups, that could also be a sign. So I'm going to go to primary prevention. These are some things that we consider when we think about preventing people from becoming victims of human trafficking if the victimization has not occurred already. And these are some tools that you may consider implementing in your work directly with older adults or individuals with disabilities. Ensuring basic needs are met. It sounds simple, but once again, we know traffickers look for folks with unmet basic needs to exploit. Are they connected to positive social supports? Do they have safe reporting and communication options? Do people know who they can reach out to if something were to happen to them? Do they know what their rights and resources are if they are working? Do they have financial literacy education? Are they given access to comprehensive and appropriate training on healthy versus unhealthy relationships, sexuality, exploitation, online safety education? When a victim comes forward, one of the best things you can do is to believe them and express that you believe them. Often when a disclosure is made, it's easy to jump to, oh my gosh, we have to make a report, we have to do X, Y, Z, we have to get this person out of the scenario, and that's all completely understandable that that's where our brains go. But we sometimes miss the most important step, which is to actually believe that person and express it, because I can't tell you how many times I've heard from a victim that they tried to disclose or that they did disclose and they weren't believed or they were dismissed. And so taking that time to actually be there with them and acknowledge the person in front of you is so important. Then once that's done, that's where we connect with local resources. That's where we make our mandated reports. That's where we move into caring for that entire family and system that's impacted. And these are just quick principles of trauma-informed care. This is something that we can use with anybody. It doesn't have to just be specific populations, but this is maintaining safety, trustworthiness and transparency, collaboration and mutuality. Are we working with other people that are supporting this individual? Are we empowering them to make their own choices, or are we accidentally taking the role of the trafficker and choosing for them? And then considering cultural, historical, and gender issues, and just know that every victim is going to be different, and there's not a cookie cutter, one-size-fits-all approach to serving victims. So some helpful questions that you might want to consider. Who lives with you? What medicines do you take? What are your sources of income, and who has access to your income? Do you get any food? If so, how often? And are you charged for that food? Questions like that are just kind of open-ended and may or may not lead anywhere. But if you're maybe observing some additional red flags, this could open the door to painting a more clear picture of what's going on. And I can send, there's a good resource from the Adult Protective Services Technical Assistance Resource Center where I got some of these questions from, and I am happy to send the full resource. Some other practical tips. Considering physical spaces, we want it to be accessible, we want it to be safe, we want it to be calm and private, and reducing any potential triggers. So even asking somebody where they would like to sit in the room, if there's anything that we can do to help them feel more safe. Maybe they need like a fidget, maybe they want a stuffed animal with them, maybe they want to sit somewhere in the room, maybe they want to have a music on, anything like that, that might help kind of de-escalate or give an outlet for anxiety. Considering different communication needs, do they need an interpreter? Are we using a professional interpreter versus a friend or a family member? That's really crucial in these kind of sensitive conversations. Maybe somebody would rather express through art. that's something I've used a number of times when that kind of initial exploratory interview is happening. Maybe someone would rather draw kind of what happened to them or how they're feeling as an entry point into conversation. And support services, service animals can be wonderful. Bringing in specialists. If you're ever working with someone and you think they might be a victim, don't feel like you have to do A through Z. Bring in somebody that does specialize in human trafficking, and I'm happy to kind of point you in that direction if that's ever a situation you find yourself in. But don't feel like you have to do it all on your own. It takes a team. And patience and time, it's often a series of conversations in order to make that identification and to really get someone the help that they need. And so patience and time are underrated tools. Mandated reporting laws in Ohio. I'm sure all of you know these, but I did want to highlight that we have an Ohio specific human trafficking hotline that does go to law enforcement directly. So if you're reporting human trafficking specifically and you want a source for reporting, you can utilize that hotline because it is a law enforcement line. And I will have a separate slide towards the end with that number on it. Potential needs of a victim. So once that identification's made, we have to consider long-term support as well. And so this can look different for everyone, but some things they might need are just a safe place to stay, addressing a substance abuse disorder, if they have any court dates, are there culturally specific services that that individual might need, and certainly mental health supports. Suggestions for professionals, consider the survivor's behaviors, choices, and mental health within the context of the cycle of violence and trauma. So instead of asking, you know, what or why is this person doing this, or why are they being resistant or difficult, or whatever those labels might be, reframing that as, you know, what happened to them or what is safer about that behavior to that person, versus engaging in those inadvertent victim blaming kind of statements. And making sure we're documenting appropriately and advocating for them where we can. So building resilience, this is a cool illustration that kind of just shows, if we're imagining positive and negative experiences on this kind of seesaw, when you have more, you know, negative life experiences, there's more likely to be these negative outcomes. So certainly when someone goes through trafficking, there's a lot of trauma, there's a lot of negative life outcomes it can have on their life. But science tells us the good news is that the more positive experiences that you experience, that your nervous system experiences, the fulcrum can actually shift and you can actually create more positive outcomes for your life. And this is essentially the science behind this whole idea of resilience. Our bodies and our brains are incredibly elastic, and they're able to really be adaptive to the traumatic things we go through. And so we can transform toxic stress and trauma into tolerable levels of stress, and we can actually heal and recover. And so I like to show this slide because this topic is hard, and a lot of people ask, you know, are we making a difference? Is it even worth it? And it is totally worth it. Yeah.
Okay, we're going to use this mic this time. Hopefully it works. So we do have one more question.
Sure.
There have been a few human trafficking busts in Ohio in the last few months. That means that there are multiple individuals. How is a situation like this dealt with?
Yeah, so we, our office facilitates a number of human trafficking operations every single year. We just did the statewide operation, which is probably the one you're referring to. We have 8 human trafficking task forces locally, including one that covers this area. And they partner between law enforcement and victim service agencies to try and identify both traffickers and victims and respond accordingly. So any victims identified in those scenarios are linked with the social service providers to try and assess what their needs might be and how to help them get out of that situation. So in this area, it would be Hope and Healing Survivor Resource Center that works directly with the trafficking survivors. So I know we're running close to time, so I'm going to be mindful of that. This is our state human trafficking hotline number for Ohio. This goes directly to law enforcement. So if you ever find yourself in a position of needing to report, or even if you're out in the community and you see something suspicious and you just don't know what to do, you can call this number. We also have an app, a text option, and an online form, which you can find on our website, which is ohioattorneygeneral.gov/human trafficking. And that will be on the last slide as well. I also quickly want to make you aware that we have an elder justice unit as well within our office. They don't deal specifically with human trafficking cases. However, they do, their overarching goal is to help protect older adults and enhance elder abuse victims' access to criminal justice services. So there's a number of different ways that the elder justice unit might be helpful. And you can contact them with this information here. I'm also happy to help make an introduction. And really quick, I'm gonna move to this one. This is how you can reach my team at the Human Trafficking Initiative, HTI, at ohioago.gov. And our website has a lot of wonderful additional resources, as well as information for the state hotline, as I mentioned, if you'd like to check that out. And I think that is all I have. Would you like to do the concluding housekeeping slides, or do we want to take any additional questions? I know we have like 1 minute.
Does anybody online have any additional questions? And I believe if we do not have any additional questions, Teresa and we can both, because I think you have a few wrap up things, and then I know I have a couple of messages as well, just for folks that are attending.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
I think my wrap up is basically your wrap up.
Before you get going, let me get the microphone.
Henry, do you have any questions? Okay.
Catchbox and check. Okay, if you just want to speak right in.
Yep. Just a reminder for those who would like a CEU, you are required to fill out the evaluation. It is linked in your confirmation email, but we will also send you that link along with the slides from the session. I believe that evaluation is open until this Friday at noon. Is that right, Bridget? Does that sound right? Friday at noon?
Friday at 5 p.m.
5 p.m. So close of business on Friday. So please make an effort to complete that before Friday. And I think that is everything. Just reach out to myself or Bridget McDonald here if you have any further questions or need any further resources. And I want to thank Mary Kate for a wonderful presentation. This is the second time I've seen her present, and every time I learned something new. So thank you so much. We appreciate having you.
And then Mary Kate, correct me if I'm wrong, but I do believe that we have you coming back for a full 3-hour CEU at the beginning of 2026. Okay, perfect. I did just want to make sure about that. So for folks that do want a little bit more information about this in the full 3-hour context, I believe we do not have that on the website currently. However, it is going to be January 21st from 9 a.m. to 12:15. We will be doing we'll be having Mary Kate back here at Direction Home, and we would very much love if you do have any more questions or you want to learn more about this topic. We would love to have you back. So at this time, if anybody has any final questions online, please let us know. Otherwise, the link to the forms should be. Form is not currently accepting responses. I will make sure that the form is accepting responses in the next couple of minutes. Everybody should be getting an email with the slides in case they need those, as well as that evaluation link once more. So be on the lookout for that within the next few hours.
Reminder, we have another Caregiver Noontime Knowledge coming up on Veterans Day, November 11th. And we will have presentations from not only the VA Association, but
also our own Direction Home. It says I'm muted. Sorry,
There's
technical difficulties.
technical
but,
difficulties.
We will have our own Direction Home Veteran Services Division speaking as well, both Rachel Woodard and Chuck Calasina. So we look forward to having that information. Thank you, everyone who attended. We appreciate your time, and have a wonderful rest of your day.